This is the $100 billion Button, a series on the science of money and well-being. It is produced by Sycamore, an app to learn and practice well-being. Visit us at trysycamore.com. In the last episode, we looked at what observational studies reveal about the association between money and well-being. While these provide valuable insights, they do not provide any causal information. In other words, they can't conclusively tell us if and how money actually causes well-being. For that, we need to turn to experimental studies, where people randomly receive money and we measure how it affects their well-being. We then compare this to a control group of people who did not receive money. A notable study in this space came out in 2022. Unlike most experimental studies which provide small amounts of money, this study randomly granted 200 participants $10,000 awards each. These participants spanned 7 geographically and economically diverse countries: the United States, Canada, Brazil, Indonesia, Kenya, the United Kingdom, and Australia. The researchers administered regular surveys for 6 months following the award that measured both experienced and evaluative well-being. For experienced well-being, the researchers tracked a series of 6 positive emotions and 6 negative emotions. For evaluative well-being, they used a standard 5-question life satisfaction questionnaire. Award winners were matched with a control group who did not receive money but who were also surveyed along the way. The benefit of this study is that it is the most purely experimental of all the studies we'll talk about, and has the largest award amount. But this one has considerations too. For one, the 6-month follow-up window limits our long-term understanding of how money affects well-being. Additionally, the value of the $10,000 award varied widely across the countries in the study. In the United States, GDP per capita is $75,000. In Brazil, it is $9,000, and in Kenya, it is $2,000. Giving your average American $10,000 thus has a different weight than for your average Kenyan. In America, this is typically just a fraction of annual earnings, and only a tiny amount relative to the $1.7 million in median lifetime earnings in the United States. But in Kenya, it might be several years of earnings. The results reveal that the award provided a small but measurable improvement to well-being across the participants studied. For life satisfaction, the average participant gained 1/3 of a point on a 35-point scale. For both positive and negative effect, the average participant saw roughly a 1/4 point improvement on 30-point scales. While these are not massive gains, this average effect conceals some of the nuance. In fact, the gains were much larger for recipients in lower-income countries. Overall, the recipients in Indonesia, Kenya, and Brazil saw improvements that were 3 times as large as those in the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, or Canada. This makes sense in light of the earnings discrepancies between countries we just mentioned. Indeed, a participant making $10,000 annually saw a well-being increase approximately double that of a participant making $100,000 annually. So this experimental study seems to validate the conclusions from the observational studies. Money does appear to improve both happiness and life satisfaction, although the effect size is modest and falls as income rises. Let's pause though. We're talking about a $100 billion button, not a $10,000 button. The award we're contemplating is 10 million times more than these researchers studied. Is there an even better proxy for this? It turns out there is, and that's lottery winners. In many ways, winning the lottery is a lot like stumbling upon our magic button. By a stroke of complete luck, you are suddenly the beneficiary of a large amount of money that appears in your bank account overnight without much effort at all. Researchers love studying the lottery because it is what is called an exogenous shock, meaning that winning the lottery is an external event that affects well-being, but is random and unpredictable. We can thus compare lottery winners with non-winners, which is similar to having a control group. In this way, lottery winner research is considered quasi-experimental, because it retains the important parts of an experiment despite the fact that the researchers didn't actually run a proper experiment. The question when studying lottery winners is if they are a representative group of people. At least in the United States, playing the lottery is very common. Estimates are that half of Americans play at least once in any given year. So far, that's encouraging. But at the end of the day, playing the lottery is effectively gambling, and gambling research suggests that this half of the population is likely to have a higher risk tolerance and process rewards differently. And our lottery winners, who are statistically more likely to play the lottery a lot, are more likely to qualify as problem gamblers, which is associated with a host of emotional problems like depression. For research looking at well-being, this could affect the conclusions we can draw. That said, while studying the lottery is not perfect, it's about as close as we'll get. The first major contribution to this space was a 1978 study that was the first to look at lottery winners' well-being. This study looked at winners of the Illinois State Lottery who had won between $50,000 and $1 million and compared them to nearby residents who had not won the lottery. In a rather shocking finding, they concluded that the winners were no better off than non-winners, a finding that captured popular media and has endured ever since. The idea that lottery winners are no happier than the rest of us is an alluring one, and made more believable by misperceptions of how frequently winners squander their jackpot. Unfortunately, the findings from this study are deeply suspect. The biggest problem by far is that it featured a tiny sample size, looking at only 22 winners compared to 22 control subjects. With a sample that small, the effect size would need to be very large to be able to identify a difference in well-being between the two groups with statistical significance. There were other problems that didn't help, including suboptimal measures of well-being. In 2020, a much more comprehensive study came along, this time out of Sweden. This study looked at over 3,000 winners who had won $277 million in prizes, as well as matched controls against which to compare well-being. Most winners received $50,000 or below, but there were some big prize winners in the lot. The study was designed to look at winners' experienced and evaluative well-being since they won the lottery, which was anywhere from 5 to 22 years later. In other words, well after the excitement and novelty of winning had occurred. As with all the modern studies we've looked at, findings differed between life satisfaction and happiness. When it comes to evaluative well-being, the authors found a small yet sustained increase in winners compared to non-winners. They found that $100,000 in winnings conferred 0.07 points on their 10-point life satisfaction scale. While small, it's important to note that this persisted for years after they won their prize. Meanwhile, for experienced well-being, the authors were unable to detect any significant difference between winners and non-winners. In other words, by the time the researchers surveyed winners years later, any effects on happiness had disappeared. There ends our whirlwind tour of research on the relationship between money and well-being. How can we summarize all this? Thankfully, the takeaways are largely compatible across all the observational, experimental, and quasi-experimental studies we've looked at. Overall, money matters, and it matters for both happiness and life satisfaction. For life satisfaction, money will provide a lasting increase to how you evaluate your life on average. For happiness, there is also a positive effect, but it appears to be notably smaller and less durable over time. And for both happiness and life satisfaction, the research suggests that more and more money is required to provide the same boost to well-being. For someone earning, say, $25,000 a year, more money readily translates to higher well-being. But by the time you're earning $100,000, those gains become harder and harder to chase. While this is not technically a plateau, in practice the effect is similar. Importantly, money is not even a sure guarantee of improvement to well-being. In Killingsworth's data, the trend was that higher-income individuals had higher well-being on average, but at the individual level, nothing was guaranteed. Some high earners had quite low well-being, while some low earners had high well-being. And across all the studies, the effect sizes were typically quite small, detectable only with large sample sizes. The largest rich-poor gap in well-being across the studies was in Killingsworth's life satisfaction data, where the highest earners had 15 points higher satisfaction than the lowest earners on a scale of 100. Not only was that both observational and uncontrolled, suggesting the true effect is likely smaller, but also it's worth remarking that this isn't that large a gap to start with. Money is clearly not a cure-all. There is a lot more that goes into determining our well-being. As Killingsworth himself puts it in his paper, money is not the secret to happiness. We also talked last episode about the importance of causality, or finding the effect of money on well-being assuming that nothing else changes. Causality will always be the gold standard for understanding this relationship, but it's also important to realize that this is rarely our reality. Very seldom do we have an opportunity to increase the amount of money we have with no other changes. Pay raises come with new responsibilities. New jobs come with new coworkers, and commutes and expectations. Switching from working at a nonprofit to working in finance will mean a lot more than just a salary increase. Even in our extreme case of a $100 billion button, your life will still change whether you want it or not. Word will get out, your name will go on the tracker lists, you'll be interviewed, people will ask you for money, the nature of relationships around you will change. When it comes to your day-to-day life, these considerations and trade-offs are just as real and important, if not more so, than the pure relationship between money and well-being. Additionally, precision is key. When we talk about money and well-being, the difference between experienced well-being and evaluative well-being is important. When someone suggests that more money will make them happy, do they really mean happy, or do they actually mean satisfied? Both are important parts of our life, but it's crucial to recognize that the vast majority of our waking lives is spent in experienced well-being mode, not evaluative mode. To be sure, evaluative well-being has its moments, at high school reunions, or comparisons with new neighbors who just moved in, or when we consider how we'll look back at our life towards its end. And we can strategically cultivate it by using things like gratitude exercises to zoom out and appreciate what we have. But the truth is, most of our moment-to-moment existence is experienced well-being. Our days at work, our time around friends and family, our spare time in the evening, or on the weekend, or on vacation, or in retirement. And for all these fleeting moments of our life, it appears that money is only one determinant. It has a low correlation with well-being and becomes less and less important as you accumulate more of it. We'll talk more about this in coming episodes. All this leads us back to our $100 billion button. $100 billion is way, way, way more money than any of the studies ever conducted on money and well-being have looked at. Even the richest lottery winners pale in comparison. It is so much money that it makes us consider the limit of the relationship between money and well-being could even be. That said, even though the leading research can't say anything definitive about this tier of money, the core principle is the same. At some point, far, far below $100 billion, the benefits of having even more money should effectively disappear due to the log relationship we talked about earlier. Having $100 billion will certainly maximize whatever money can do for your well-being, but what it can do for you is only so much. But why does this occur? Why does money do less and less for your well-being as you accumulate more and more of it? To answer that, we'll have to consider how our brains are wired. Stay tuned. Hi there, this is Henry, the founder of Sycamore. At Sycamore, we are out to help people better understand, manage, and practice well-being. If you've enjoyed this series so far, please consider sharing it with a friend, and visit us at trysycamore.com to learn more. Thanks again.